to apply our knowledge in psychosocial hazards and risks, which is really exciting because I've got a new case study that we're going to discuss, and we're going to sort of discuss one framework that I just picked that I thought would be good to relate to and connect with. But first, let's just have a bit of introductions. This is Felix is from Mind Muse, and he is the one who makes everything happen. I just come here and talk. So thank you, Felix. And I'm from WHS Guard. I do safety, psychosocial safety in the recent years. And yeah, that's my bread and butter. So if you have any questions, queries, always happy to help, reach out. So what we did last week was we did a bit of a focus webinar on the psychosocial hazards. So basically pulling apart what the psychosocial hazards were and how they interact with each other, what it looks like from an individual point of view, from team point of view, and from an organizational point of view. We did focus a little bit more on individual perspective rather than team or organization. And I'll get to that in a little bit and explain why it was like that. But really, what's the most important thing that's coming to the surface in the number of conversations that I've had is not about the individual hazards, but about how they interact with each other and interact with the people who are experiencing it to ultimately cause a compounding of the risk itself. And basically, the way we've designed these webinars, I think this is probably a good idea to have a bit of a chat about that, is that rather than break them from a work design point of view and discuss the risks and the fixes accordingly, we sort of came at it from a different perspective, and it's mainly from an organizational perspective, which is like individual, team, and organization. And I feel it's a little bit easier to deal with the psychosocial risks when you look at it from these three lenses, because what happens is we can identify the levers and controls with a lot more ease, and we can find people who are accountable, responsible, et cetera, also with a fair amount of ease when you're looking through these lenses, which is why I thought it'd be a good way to break the webinars down. And I'm very aware that, it's only half an hour and there's only so much that we can scratch on the surface, and hopefully give some tools in every webinar, or at least one tool in a webinar, so that people can go back home and say, okay, you know what, I learned one thing today. All right. So for today's case study, we have Priya. Priya is a manager. She's a project manager. She's known of how good she is with her delivery and reliable. She's very reliable. She's calm. But 3 months ago, the organization introduced a performance tracking system. It was basically driven by technology, but there was a lot of change in the way they did their work. So there was a restructure. Since then, things have changed. And her manager notes that she's still delivering, like she's still doing a great job, but she may need some resilience training because she's starting to see some cracks in her performance or in her behavior, so to say. HR observed an increase in complaints from her team about fairness, inconsistencies. So little information is starting to trickle through outside the team. It may not be as good as people would have thought that it was. Now, why is this important? Like, you've had a restructure and you've done what you've done, and then things don't look so good. Maybe it's just teething problems. Why would anyone flag this to the organization as something important to be dealt with? Now, we can talk about legislation all day, but I'd rather talk about why it really matters to organizations. So what happens is based on the Becher and Dollard research from 2016, it's that old. Wow, that's 10 years, Felix. They find that in places where there is psychological safety is lacking, or there is more psychosocial risk, about 43% of people, there's a rise in sickness. People tend to, not come to work or have other reasons to avoid work. There is a productivity loss, about 72%, which is substantial. And billions, not millions, is lost by way of costs from the organization. So that's research, and this is why it matters, because organizations that do provide good psychosocial safety ultimately, end up succeeding, and they do really well. So now what do we do with Priya? So what's been happening? Oh, look at that. Priya is working extended hours, so she's obviously very much motivated and sending emails late at night. She's stopped delegating routine tasks, which is a little bit strange, but maybe it's to do with the, changeover. So she's thinking that maybe she'll do them. It'll be easier. Team members report changing priorities, unclear expectations. Two recent major documentation errors have occurred. There's tension in the team meetings, frequent conflict. One team member reported feeling pushed too hard. Priya appears to be irritable, dismissive when challenged. So the important thing is not what's happening, but that there is a shift from what she was like before to what she is like now. And she's taken no leave despite reporting that she's exhausted. Now, I want everyone to just have a bit of a pause and a think that what is this like? Is this the general team, dynamics changing? Is it going to settle if you just kind of sit back and watch it? Um, what's driving it? Like, what's making Priya do this? She wasn't like that before. We all know that. What evidence do you need to say that something's off? What is the evidence that you need to create? Like, it's very intangible at this moment. It's kind of this and it's kind of that, but is it really? And most importantly, what do you need to do next? Like, what needs to happen? 9 times out of 10, management will say, oh, you know what? We've had a transition, we've had a change happen, and it's just teething problems. Let's just sit back and watch how things settle down, and it's just a matter of time. But maybe it will settle, maybe it won't. It's a management decision to act or not act. But what's happening behind all of this behavioral change is this. What are the likely hazards? There is obviously a high demand on Priya to deliver. She probably herself is not clear after the transition what is the expectation of her role, and whether she has support or not. And it could be because of the new changeover, her workload's just gone through the roof and she's fatigued. So this is a common approach that people have. This once systems change, organizations change, things evolve. Organizations tend to think of this as a performance issue. So obviously she's feeling pressured, but at the same time, she's thinking, well, I need to do better. And she's upped her performance, but everything else is falling by the wayside. So at this point, her manager's thought should be, is this really a performance issue? She was a good performance until that point of time. So one of the things that I'm saying constantly in this conversation, you will notice is that it wasn't like this and it's like this now. So in psychosocial risk management, we look at patterns, trends. We look at how things evolve in a cultural sense, in a relationship sense, in an organization over a period of time. And that's probably the biggest key that I can give to you today when you need to identify whether there's a risk or there isn't a risk. And now we want to talk a little bit about how the hazards play up and how they interact with each other. So what's happening here is there's a bit of a hazard interaction happening, which is accumulating Priya's situation. So she's got high workload. She doesn't have clarity on her own. And she, there is not much of a recovery time. She's just going from one thing to the other, and she probably doesn't have support as well. And all these, when they're present in one situation, really do make things very high risk. If it was just high workload on its own, but she had the support, she had the recovery time, and she had her manager's support, it wouldn't play out in the same way that it's playing out right now because she just doesn't have any one of those things. So when the leaders themselves don't have the psychological or psychosocial framework supporting them, it's very hard for them to provide it to their team as well. So you have it's showing up in 3 different ways. Within the individual, it's fatigue, cognitive overload. She's probably always busy, too pressurized to talk to you. In the team, it shows up by pressure and conflict, as you've already seen. And in organizational, you can see deadlines being missed, poor resourcing, and probably also performance gets impacted, which is how we can go back to the second slide where organizations lose money when they are not providing a psychologically safe environment. Okay. So what does our hierarchy of control look like? Does it look like a triangle in the normal safety context? Well, no. And the reason
Just
I say no
no, just
is,
going to jump in. I've
yeah,
just put this up as a question to everyone too. So feel
okay.
free to give them time to answer that too.
All right. Thank you, Felix. I wasn't looking at that. I've got one little screen I'm working out of today, so apologies. And I am at a site and I will be doing leadership training today, which I'm really excited about. So I'm very happy to still be able to do the webinar. Otherwise, we might have had to change or cancel, but I'm glad I'm here.
All
Thank
good.
you.
Maybe just
Uh,
give it another 10 seconds, but feel free to go and people can answer in their own line.
Okay, so what is our control? That's the biggest question. When you're risk managing, we can't really manage a risk without having a control and then a control management process, a person responsible for controls. And that's where the team, the individual, and the organization come in. Because in the case of work design, we can say, oh, let's design a better work. But it becomes a little bit challenging to look at the people accountable, responsible to do the action. Whereas when you start looking from individual, team, and organizational point of view, you can sort of say, okay, you know what? These individuals need to do this, the team needs to do this, and the organization needs to do this. So does she need more coaching? Maybe the transition hasn't happened very well, and she needs just more skills maybe. She's not resilient, she's had a bit of change in happen and she's just basically lacking personal resilience. That's a question. And it can be a valid question in many situations. Does there need to be an adjustment of workload and priorities? Or do you, as leadership, want to just wait and monitor, which I said can be a situation in many organizations that they're just going to put it down to wait, you know what? It's teething problems. Let's just see what happens. But what really the risk here is, which we are not really talking about at this point of time, is if you let this slide and you wait for a certain amount of time to see what happens, there's a pretty good chance that you will burn the people out and you will start seeing very cumulative impact on the workers. People might start leaving the team. She herself might start considering wanting to leave the work. And that actually translates into big dollars for organizations because once you have highly skilled people leave, they leave with, organizational knowledge. You need to put money towards hiring new people, put money towards training new people. So there is not only disruption, but there is clear, substantial monetary loss. So you really want to be retaining people and you want to catch this at an early stage when it's just happening. And that's the best time to do it because in that situation, you will find that people recover a lot more easily, recover a lot better. Um, and it's very quick return on investment, for want of a better word. Um, have you got our answers, Felix? Can we jump into the weak and strong controls, which I'm really keen to talk about?
Yes, all good. The
Okay,
intent was just to give a bit of space for people to try themselves and we'll go.
okay, good. Thank you. So the reason you don't have a pyramid here is because in psychosocial, although we refer to the original hierarchy of control as a mechanism for managing risk and controlling risk, all of the risk doesn't show up as, most impactful and least impactful. And the reason I put it in a bit of a list is because each one individually is somewhat effective, but the controls in conjunction with other controls is more impactful. So the reason for doing this in this way is saying, okay, you know what? You have to pick one of each. That way, when you come up with your control management solution, you will have a more impactful outcome than if you were only to look at eliminating the hazard to redesigning work or substituting the hazard by changing the process or looking at the workload tools or looking at something administrative and look at training maybe or build resilience. So if you did any one of these controls individually, you would have less impact. But if you were to look at her situation holistically and say, you know what, let's look at the way the work is structured and look at how we can design it better and structure it better so that, there's more delegation, more responsibility, but at the same time, there's a feedback loop and more consultation happening in the team, et cetera, et cetera. You can redesign it. And then you can change the process. So whatever the interactions are with their computer systems and with their suppliers and with their stakeholders, you have a look at that process holistically and you say, okay, we can just change this a little bit this way, make it more easy for her. And then the engineering, it looks at workloads, how you design systems and how you do the resourcing. And maybe you do need to hire more people. That might be just a situation that the business has grown. What can you say? And then you look at coaching, that maybe the change is still happening. Maybe a little bit more coaching could help. But on its own, keep in mind, coaching does not help unless you do the other three on top. And then finally, resilience training, wellness, EAP, they're nice to have. But on their own, they are very little impactful. In fact, in organizations that only focus on the administrative and the EAPs, well-being initiatives, and don't look at engineering, substitution, and systems controls, end up having a very resentful workforce because they just kind of think that this is all cosmetic. They're not really interested in really doing the right thing by their employees. So recommendation is use all the controls where possible. At least use, the top three, try to have them, at least two of them in your solution of managing the risk. Now, keep in mind, we are still talking from an individual perspective point of view. In the next webinars, we will discuss how teams would do this. In the next few webinars, we'll talk about how organizations will do this. And what will come together by the end of this series is realistically how an organization on every level can provide psychosocial risk management controls, monitoring, assessing, and feedback, complete the whole loop, so that this whole system works and you can identify these problems at very early stage, monitor and manage them as the organization, takes care of their daily business as usual. Have you got any more questions coming, Felix, or I can jump into the radar now?
You could go to the radar. I'll ask
Okay.
at the end.
All right, great. So we are 20 minutes in, and we'll have a little bit of time left for questions as well. So at this point, what I really want to talk about is what are sort of systems that can assist us to do work like this. This is all well and said. I've talked about teams, I've talked about individuals, I've talked about organizations, but you do need a certain amount of systematic work to make this happen because it's a little bit more complex than just doing a risk assessment where there is, risk of heights, for example. So today we're going to talk about the radar system, and I've written a paper on it. It's on my Substack. You can go and have a look. It's a huge paper. It's very detailed. We're going to talk a little bit about it just today here. It's not something I invented. It's not something that I made. I merely collected information and sort of presented it in a way that's more palatable and digestible for most people. So it's very simple. It's an acronym. RADAR means review and analyze, document, act early, and review again. So as you can see, there are two reviews at the bottom and at the top, which basically is to emphasize how important it is to keep your fingers on the nerves of your organization to ensure that you are monitoring the environment, you are looking at the environment, and you're ensuring that it is behaving and things are the way you want them to be. So you start off with looking at the weak signals in an organization. You look at work pressure, you look at conflict, complaints, exactly whatever Priya's situation was. You collect the data, you crunch it, and you come up with some main themes of the way things are happening. Then that's the analysis part of it. And then you examine that in context of job demand, role clarity, leadership practices, and support structures. So you don't straight away jump into the hazards. You actually look at the weaker signals or behavioral changes, as we call them, before you start connecting them to the psychosocial hazards. So once you have made that connection between the behaviors and the psychosocial hazards, you start looking at what is playing up in a big way, what's playing up not so much of a big way. And you look at your risk register, or if you don't have a psychosocial risk register, or ideally you should have a health and safety register, which has a section of psychosocial on it. That's the way to go. But basically you look at your risk register and see, where are we at with our psychosocial risks? Have they gone up since this conversation happened? And then you either do your risk assessment again, or you review your risk assessment if you already have done one. And at that point, you moderate your controls. and you look at your control owners who are people in the organization, and you have the conversation to them and say, okay, you know what? We need to change these controls. We need to manage them better. Here is what we need to do. And it is yours to action because you are the control owner. So this is what I'm talking about levers. So that way now you can identify who is going to be doing it. And once they've done what they need to do, you go back and you review and monitor. Does that kind of make sense? It seems like I'm talking to myself, but I know it's a lot. But if you want to read more about it, please go and have a look at the paper. I don't know. We can email it to them, Felix, after this, and just for people who want more information. But I'd say have a look at it. 9 times out of 10, radar does the job. You don't really need to go into the 18 other frameworks. This will do the job for most businesses. Any questions?
Yeah. Okay. I think I've got heaps of questions. So what I'll do is, this is the point where I'll stop the recording when I send the recording
Yeah.
through. But acknowledging there's really 5-ish minutes left, I'd love to hear kind of 1-2 minute kind of short answers. An interesting one is how this may be applied, say, in small, medium businesses, particularly when they may not have the mindset or the maturity.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, for example, having the risk register with the psychosocial section, many don't have that luxury or may not even have the resource to have a safety person to do a lot of this work. So how do you see some of this being embedded in practice, particularly in those more resource-side environments?
Look, I work in small and medium-sized businesses. I have been working actually in the past 2 years now. And before that, I used to work in huge organizations, and that was a very conscious decision I made because there's a big gap. There is no one in the market or very few people in the market who are actually providing the support to develop risk registers in a way that serves the small and medium class, organizations. But realistically, it is a training exercise that we need to upgrade safety advisors, safety managers into including psychosocial into their risk register and also managing. It is a 3-step process to develop a psychosocial aspect of your risk register. I do it all the time. There are methodologies that we can use, like radar here. There are 18 methodologies altogether. And if anybody wants to look at my Substack, I'll be posting them there because I think people need to know about it. But having said that, there is no easy answer to that. You've got to get into the trenches and you've got to basically look at your risks and you've got to do your surveys. You've got to do your focus groups. You've got to quantify your information about how your teams are working, what the risks they're talking about. But the good news is this is a project. Once you do it and you have developed your risk assessments and you have developed your risk register, the monitoring and assessment and assurance work, it's pretty straightforward. And what I really enjoy seeing in organizations after we've done this work is how much clarity the leadership has on what's happening in the teams. It's not a human resource conversation anymore. It is a risk conversation. And that shift is just really nice to see. And that's why I'm so passionate about it.
And of course, I mean, I could have answered with my own 2 cents there, coming
Yeah.
with the work we do helping SMEs.
Yeah.
How would you say, so we walked through Priya's story, and if you were to quickly in 30 seconds, if you were a HR manager of a 20-size organization, you didn't know Priya's story necessarily, but you wanted to go through the radar process, could you step through practically, but really quickly, how that may look like in practice, just to kind of reinforce and conclude and bring things together?
Look, I find myself working with human resource managers very closely, and I'm working with them every day. It was something that was not a part of my portfolio like 10 years ago, but now I'm just working with human resource every day. But the shift really has to be the shift of mindset from looking at it like a personal cultural problem to a risk problem. And there's usually a training piece for the human resource managers themselves to upskill and understand risk. I do speak to them, I give them workshops, whatever they need. But having said that, once you've done that, you need to have your surveys in place. And the survey, I always recommend to design it bespoke based upon what your cultural understanding is, focus groups and one-on-one interviews. And we need to have the qualitative data before we can start coming at a risk profile even. So that's the initial work, and it's quite substantial. There is a consultation piece that we need to demonstrate for the regulator that we have consulted with all stakeholders, giving them a sufficient amount of time, giving them a sufficient support to do that. So that's also needed. But at the same time, once you've done your surveys, once you've done your focus groups and your one-on-one interviews, and for anyone who's interested, look at our recording for the second webinar that Felix did, which was really good. I loved it. Anyway, so yeah, once you've done that, then the work actually starts off establishing what the risk categories are within psychosocial, what the hazards are, who the control owners are, who are the, what the fixes are, for want of a better word. And look, in some cases, you just can't eliminate risk. And that's where your risk appetite conversation comes in. But you can't get to the risk appetite conversation until you've actually established what the inherent risk is in a psychosocial situation. I mean, for example, in a hospitality venue, you have abusive customers day in and out. That's the risk of doing the job. And you can support people with resilience training, with escalation, de-escalation trainings. But at the same time, that's an inherent risk. And it has to be sort of stated in the risk appetite of the business. But the fact that the big business acknowledges it, they will also put in measures to monitor, manage, and control the situation. So you can't control the event, but you can control everything afterwards that comes. I don't know. Did I digress, Felix, or did I answer? I don't know.
That's fine. All right. I appreciate everyone taking the time.
Yeah.
There's always so many questions.
Can I, sorry, just say, we will share the slide deck, and the last slide is actually another case study, which I thought people would be interested in having a quick read. And if you have any questions in regards to the second case study, happy for you to email us. I have a list of answers, fixes, all of that available, but I just didn't want to give it in this webinar because I want people to think about it. All right, you go. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, good. No, I appreciate you doing that. I pushed you to have exercises. So I appreciate you did that. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. We are